Here are the top 5 aggressive Rebirth loadouts with meta TTKs. Now since they are aggressive loadouts for my Rebirth demons out there, they're all close range options with a mix of ARs and SMGs. Along with the loadouts, I'm also going to provide you with some relevant stats that make them good aggressive loadouts. These stats include fire rate, ADS time, sprint to fire time, tactical sprint to fire time, and lastly the TTK within 10 meters. All these stats I got from a website called sim.gg and their link is in the description. Check them out for yourself. I'm gonna make this video as short as possible and get straight to the loadouts, and all I ask in return is if you can hit that like button to help a brother grow. Appreciate you hitting that like button. Now let's get into loadouts. At number 5 we have the Vanguard PPSH. Now this loadout for the PPSH is a hipfire loadout, and this is one of the best hipfire guns in the game right now. With its amazing speed and hipfire accuracy, it's great for pushing this thing down campers' throats. You probably have picked up a PPSH from the ground, so you already know this thing hits hard, but this loadout makes it even better. So check it out. The fire rate on this gun is the highest from all the guns on this list with 1224 rounds per minute. The ADS speed comes to 369 millisecond, which is on the high side, but that doesn't really matter as you won't be ADSing anyways because this is a hipfire machine. The sprint to fire time is 152 milliseconds and the tac sprint to fire time is 229 milliseconds. And lastly, the TTK for this gun within 10 meters comes to 637 milliseconds. Now this is only good super close range, so be aware if you end up getting your cheeks clapped by an MP40 for more than 10 meters. Now moving on to the number 4 on the list, we have the AK-47. Now I know you're used to the long range AK, but I built this thing for speed as I have built all these guns on the list for speed. This SMG AK has a whole another feel to it, and if you haven't tried it, you definitely need to. The TTK within 10 meters of this comes out to be 600 milliseconds, which is the third highest on the list. The fire rate is 600 rounds per minute, which is a little bit on the slower side, but the damage and the TTK makes up for that. The AK hits hella hard, man. ADS time is 251 milliseconds, the sprint to fire time is 162 milliseconds, and the tac sprint to fire time is 244 milliseconds. As you can see, very competitive when it comes to speed, and obviously not on the level of the MP5s and the MP40s, but for an SMG AR, this thing feels amazing. You definitely need to give it a go. Now speaking of SMG ARs, at number 3 we have the XM4. When I first used this loadout, I was kind of shook because I did not think it was going to be as fast as it was. This thing actually feels like an SMG. I can't seem to pick between the AK and the XM4, so let me know which one is your favorite in the comments. Are you an AK guy or are you an XM4 guy? Let me know. But when it comes to the XM4, the TTK comes out to be 664 milliseconds. So a little bit slower than the AK, but still very good. Now where the XM4 beats the AK is the speed in my opinion. The fire rate is 720 rounds per minute. The ADS time is 227 milliseconds. The sprint to fire time is 188 milliseconds, and lastly the tactical sprint to fire time is 281 milliseconds. Try this one out and I promise it's gonna feel like an SMG. Now let's move on to actual SMGs. At number 2 we have the OWEN gun. The OWEN gun is probably the meta SMG right now, strictly based on the TTK for this gun. It has a TTK of 438 milliseconds within 10 meters, which is the highest on the list. Since it's the highest on the list, you might be asking why it's at number 2 and not number 1. Well, because this is an aggressive list, and for an aggressive gun it needs to be fast and snappy. The OWEN gun is fast but not the fastest. Along with that, it also has a damage drop off more than the MP40, which is the number 1 on the list. The OWEN gun has a better TTK within 15 meters, but after that it drops off based on this chart from sim.gg. When it comes to fire rate, the OWEN gun has a fire rate of 822 rounds per minute and the ADS time is 250 milliseconds. The sprint to fire time on this gun is also 200 milliseconds, and the tactical sprint to fire time comes in around at 300 milliseconds. So as you can see, a little bit on the slower side for an SMG, but still very solid, especially when you take into account that monster TTK. Now let's move on to number 1 on the list. We have the MP40. Now I know this used to be the top SMG when Vanguard first came out, and after a while people discovered other builds that seemed to kill faster, like the well gun and the OWEN gun. But this MP40 build is the best gun to use in Rebirth for an aggressive player. This will make you feel like the movement king himself. The TTK for this gun is 462 milliseconds, which is almost as good as the OWEN gun, but the thing that puts this on the top of the OWEN gun is the speed of the MP40. This is the fastest gun on the list as the ADS time for this build is 189 milliseconds. The sprint to fire time for this gun is 141 milliseconds and the tac sprint to fire time is 212 milliseconds. Along with that, the MP40 also dishes out 779 rounds per minute. You feel like the Flash with this build, and it's hella snappy as well. The MP40 is my go-to gun if I want to sweat out for sure. So now that you know the 5 aggressive guns, let's rank all these 5 weapons based on the time to kill, ADS time, and the tactical sprint to fire time to find out the best gun. I picked these 3 categories because I felt like those are the most important categories when it comes to an aggressive gun. So that's why I chose those 3 categories. And as you can see, MP40 is repeatedly at the top of the list for all the 3 categories. And it makes sense as well because it's an SMG and has one of the highest TTKs. Now you can choose which gun you want to use based on these stats or even try all of them out. Why not, am I right? But I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, leave a like so I know to make more of these types of videos. And since I just gave you the close range options, here are the top 5 best long range options to use in Warzone right now. There's some interesting guns on the list, so you definitely want to check that out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.